The world watched with bated breath. The year was 1954. The ashes of World War II still smouldered, but a new conflict had begun, the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a struggle. This global chess match played out on multiple boards. Nowhere was this more evident than in Vietnam. Vietnam became a crucial battleground in this ideological war. The country, scarred by French colonial rule, had been fighting for its independence. The Vietnamese people found themselves caught in this new global conflict, a conflict that would escalate into a long and brutal war. This was not a war easily defined. It was a war fought on multiple fronts. It was a war that would challenge American society. This is the story of the Vietnam War. To understand the Vietnam War, one must first delve into the intricate tapestry of its past. For centuries, Vietnam had been a prize sought by foreign powers. China, France, Japan, all had staked their claim on this strategically important land. By the mid-20th century, France, weakened after World War II, found its grip on Vietnam slipping. A nationalist movement, led by the charismatic Ho Chi Minh, rose to challenge French colonial rule. Ho Chi Minh, a complex and enigmatic figure, embodied the aspirations of a nation yearning for independence. A communist by ideology, he was, for many Vietnamese, first and foremost a patriot, a symbol of resistance against foreign domination. The First Indochina War, which erupted in 1946, pitted Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh forces against the might of the French military. The jungles of Vietnam became a battleground, a testament to the Vietnamese people's determination to break free from colonial shackles. After a humiliating defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, France was forced to withdraw from Vietnam. The Geneva Accords, signed that same year, temporarily divided the country along the 17th parallel. The North, under Ho Chi Minh's communist government, and the South, supported by the United States, were now locked in a struggle for the soul of Vietnam. This fragile peace, however, would be short-lived. The United States, deeply entrenched in the Cold War, viewed the communist victory in the North with growing alarm. The domino theory took root in American foreign policy. The belief that if one Southeast Asian nation fell to communism, others would follow. Vietnam, in the eyes of American policymakers, became a pivotal battleground in the fight against communist expansion. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a seasoned military strategist, committed American military advisors to train and equip the South Vietnamese army. What began as a trickle of support soon turned into a torrent. As the conflict escalated, so too did America's involvement. The die was cast. A nation, still grappling with the wounds of Korea, found itself drawn into the quagmire of another Asian war. The stage was set for a conflict that would define a generation, a war that would test the limits of American power and resolve, and leave an indelible scar on the soul of a nation. The Vietnam War, a war fought in the name of freedom and democracy, would become a symbol of America's greatest triumphs and its most profound failures. The year was 1964. The world watched as the fragile peace in Vietnam continued to unravel. Tensions ran high in the Gulf of Tonkin, a strategic waterway off the coast of Vietnam. On August 2nd, the USS Maddox, an American destroyer on a surveillance mission in the Gulf, reported being attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. The incident, shrouded in confusion and conflicting accounts, sent shockwaves through the American government and public. 2 days later, on August 4th, the Maddox, along with another destroyer, the USS Turner Joy, reported another attack. This time, however, doubts lingered. The darkness of night, the choppy waters, and the fog of war made it difficult to verify the details. Despite the lack of conclusive evidence, the Johnson administration seized upon the incident as an act of aggression by North Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution, passed by the U.S. Congress with overwhelming support, granted President Lyndon B. Johnson broad war powers. This resolution, a pivotal turning point in the conflict, effectively marked America's full-fledged entry into the Vietnam War. What had begun as a limited advisory role had now escalated into a full-blown military commitment. Section 2, A Nation Divided, the Tet Offensive. The year 1968 dawned with an eerie silence. The Vietnamese Lunar New Year, Tet, was traditionally a time of truce, a period of family reunions and celebration, but in the early morning hours of January 30th, that silence was shattered. The North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong launched a series of coordinated attacks across South Vietnam, targeting major cities, military installations, and the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. The Tet Offensive, as it came to be known, was a military and psychological blow to the United States and its South Vietnamese allies. It exposed the vulnerability of American forces and shattered the illusion that the war was being won. The fighting was fierce and brutal, with heavy casualties on both sides. The battle for Hue, an ancient city of great cultural significance, raged for weeks, leaving behind a trail of destruction and despair. The Tet Offensive had a profound impact on American public opinion. The images of the fighting, broadcast into American homes on the nightly news, brought the horrors of war into sharp focus. The credibility of the Johnson administration, which had repeatedly assured the American people that victory was in sight, was severely damaged. The Tet Offensive exposed the deep divisions within American society over the war, fueling the growing anti-war movement. Section 3, Shadows of War, the My Lai Massacre, March 16, 1968, a date etched in infamy in the annals of the Vietnam War. On that day, in the small village of My Lai, a company of American soldiers, under the command of Lieutenant William Calley, committed an unspeakable act of brutality. Over 300 unarmed Vietnamese civilians, mostly women, children, and elderly, were systematically rounded up and murdered. The My Lai Massacre, as it came to be known, remained largely hidden from the public eye for nearly a year. When the story finally broke, it sent shockwaves through the United States and the world. The gruesome details of the massacre, revealed through eyewitness accounts and photographic evidence, ignited a firestorm of outrage and condemnation. The My Lai Massacre became a symbol of the dark underbelly of the Vietnam War, a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the potential for brutality that lurks within even the most disciplined armies. It further eroded public support for the war, fueling the arguments of those who believed that America's involvement in Vietnam was morally indefensible. The legacy of My Lai would forever stain America's conscience, a stark reminder of the horrors of war and the fragility of peace. Section 4, Shifting Sands, the war grinds on. Despite the shocks of the Tet Offensive and the My Lai Massacre, the Vietnam War dragged on. The conflict had morphed into a bloody stalemate, a war of attrition that seemed to have no end in sight. The jungles and rice paddies of Vietnam became a killing field, claiming the lives of young Americans and Vietnamese alike. President Lyndon B. Johnson, his presidency shattered by the war, announced he would not seek re-election. Richard Nixon, promising peace with honor, assumed the presidency in 1969, yet the war continued, spreading into neighboring Laos and Cambodia. The Paris Peace Accords, signed in 1973, offered a glimmer of hope, but the agreement proved fragile. The fall of Saigon in 1975 marked the end of the Vietnam War and the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. The war left an indelible mark on both nations, a legacy of loss, division, and unanswered questions. For the United States, it was a bitter defeat, a blow to its image as a global superpower. For Vietnam, it was a hard-won victory, but one achieved at a tremendous cost. The humid air hung heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation. The jungle, a living, breathing entity, pressed in on all sides, its emerald canopy filtering the sunlight into an eerie green half-light. For the American soldier, Vietnam was a world away from home, a sensory overload that assaulted the senses and frayed the nerves. They were young men, many barely old enough to shave, plucked from the familiar rhythms of American life and thrust into the heart of a conflict they barely understood. They came from all walks of life, farmers' sons from the Midwest, city boys from the East Coast, African Americans seeking opportunity in a segregated society. United by their uniforms and their mission, they found themselves bonded by fear, camaraderie, and the shared experience of combat. The jungle became their classroom, their crucible, their constant companion. They learned to navigate its treacherous terrain, to distinguish between the rustling leaves of an animal and the stealthy movement of an enemy. They learned to trust their instincts, their buddies, and the cold steel of their rifles. There was John, a medic from Iowa, who carried his medical kit like a shield, desperate to save lives in a place where death lurked around every corner. He wrote letters to his sweetheart back home, pouring out his heart, his fears, his longing for peace. There was Miguel, a radio operator from Texas, who kept the lines of communication open, his voice a lifeline connecting the soldiers in the field to headquarters. He clung to memories of his family, their laughter, the warmth of his mother's tortillas to keep him going. And there was David, a squad leader from New York City, hardened by combat, haunted by the faces of fallen comrades. He carried a tattered photograph of his younger brother, a reminder of the life that awaited him back home, a life that seemed a world away. For the South Vietnamese soldier, the Vietnam War was a fight for survival, a struggle to determine the fate of their homeland. They fought alongside Americans, driven by the desire to protect their families and way of life. Many witnessed the brutality of the Viet Cong and saw their communities torn apart. They faced the same dangers as their American counterparts, but received little recognition. Their sacrifices often went unnoticed, their stories untold. They were the shadow warriors, the elusive enemy that seemed to melt into the jungle itself. The Viet Cong, the guerrilla force fighting for the communist North, were a constant threat. Their presence felt everywhere, yet rarely seen. They were masters of camouflage and deception, using the terrain to their advantage, striking swiftly and silently before disappearing into the undergrowth. For them, the Vietnam War was not a foreign conflict, but a continuation of a long and bitter struggle for independence. They saw the Americans as invaders, the latest in a long line of foreign powers attempting to impose their will on Vietnam. They were fighting for their homeland, for their families, for their vision of a united and independent Vietnam. They were often poorly equipped, lacking the sophisticated weaponry of their adversaries, but they were highly motivated, fighting with the tenacity and ferocity of those defending their own soil. They relied on their knowledge of the terrain, their intricate network of tunnels and hidden bases, and their unwavering belief in their cause. They were farmers by day, soldiers by night, their lives a blend of hardship, sacrifice, and unwavering determination. There was Le Van, a young man who had joined the Viet Cong after witnessing the bombing of his village by American planes. He had lost everything, his family, his home, his livelihood. He fought with the fury of a man possessed, driven by a thirst for revenge and a burning desire to liberate his homeland. There was Nguyen Thi, a woman who risked her life carrying supplies and messages through the treacherous Ho Chi Minh Trail, the lifeline connecting the north to the south. She endured hunger, exhaustion, and the constant threat of enemy attack. her spirit unbroken by the hardships she faced. And there was Pham Van Dong, a seasoned guerrilla leader who commanded his troops with a mix of tactical brilliance and ideological fervor. He believed wholeheartedly in the righteousness of his cause, inspiring his men to fight with unwavering commitment. Section 4. Scars on the Soul, the War Within. The Vietnam War was not just a clash of armies, it was a war that raged within the hearts and minds of those who fought it. For many, the return home was just the beginning of another battle, a battle against the demons that haunted their dreams and poisoned their waking hours. The soldiers who fought in Vietnam returned home changed men. Some found solace in the company of fellow veterans, men who understood their pain, who spoke the language of their shared trauma. Section 1. Silent Casualties, the War on Vietnamese Civilians. The whir of helicopter blades sliced through the humid air. For the Vietnamese people caught in the crossfire of a war not of their making, such scenes were a terrifying part of daily life. Their villages, nestled among rice paddies and verdant hills, became battlegrounds. They were the silent casualties, the forgotten victims of a war that raged across their homeland. Their stories were often whispers, lost in the cacophony of battle. Section 2. The Unseen Scars. Agent Orange and its legacy. Agent Orange, a powerful herbicide deployed by the US military to defoliate the dense jungle, seeped into the soil and water, leaving behind a toxic legacy. The chemical, intended to deprive the Viet Cong of cover, had devastating consequences for the Vietnamese people and the environment. Birth defects soared in the years after the war, a grim testament to the long-term effects of Agent Orange. The use of Agent Orange stands as a stark reminder of the unintended consequences of war, the indiscriminate nature of its destruction. Section 3. A land uprooted displacement and the refugee crisis. Millions of people were forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge from the fighting, the bombing, the fear that permeated their daily lives. Families crammed into overcrowded boats, risking perilous journeys across the South China Sea, desperate to escape the chaos. The war created a diaspora, scattering the Vietnamese people across the globe. They rebuilt their lives in foreign lands, carrying with them the scars of war and the memories of a homeland lost. Section 4. Echoes of War, the Enduring Trauma. The guns fell silent in 1975, but the echoes of war continued to reverberate through Vietnamese society. The trauma manifested in different ways, in the nightmares that haunted their sleep, in the flashbacks that transported them back to the battlefields, in the anxieties that shadowed their waking hours. The Vietnamese people, however, are known for their resilience, their ability to rise above adversity. Section 1. A nation divided, the Homefront in turmoil. Across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, far from the jungles and rice paddies of Vietnam, a different kind of battle raged within the United States. The nation, deeply divided over its involvement in Southeast Asia, grappled with the moral, social and political ramifications of a war that seemed to have no end in sight. The Vietnam War was not just a foreign conflict, it was a war that pierced the very fabric of American society, leaving an indelible mark on its soul. The rise of dissent from teach-ins to mass protests. On college campuses across the nation, a wave of dissent began to rise, fueled by a growing sense of moral outrage and a deep skepticism of the government's justifications for the war. The Vietnam War was the first televised war, and the images flickering across television screens night after night brought home the horrors of war with a visceral immediacy that previous generations had never experienced. The anti-war movement drew strength from a diverse coalition of students, civil rights activists, academics, and ordinary citizens united in their opposition to the war. The music of the era became a soundtrack for the anti-war movement, with artists like Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and Jimi Hendrix giving voice to the anxieties, frustrations, and moral outrage of a generation. Section 3. The Media's Lens, Shaping Public Opinion. The Vietnam War was the first major conflict to be broadcast into American homes on a daily basis. The nightly news, with its graphic footage of combat and its interviews with soldiers on the front lines, brought the realities of war into sharp focus, shaping public opinion in unprecedented ways. The war was no longer a distant conflict. It was a stark reality that intruded into American homes night after night. Section 4. The Soldier's Homecoming, a Hero's Welcome Denied. For the soldiers returning home from Vietnam, the transition to civilian life proved to be a jarring and often painful experience. Unlike previous generations of veterans who had returned from war to parades and celebrations, the Vietnam veterans came home to a nation deeply divided over the war they had fought. They were often met with indifference, hostility, or even outright scorn. Many veterans struggled to reconcile their experiences in Vietnam with the realities of life back home. Section 1. The Weight of Memory. A Nation Reflects. The fall of Saigon in 1975 marked the end of the Vietnam War, but its legacy continued to cast a long shadow over the United States. The Vietnam War was a watershed moment in American history, a turning point that forced a reassessment of the nation's role in the world and the limits of its power. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, dedicated in 1982, became a sacred space for healing and remembrance. The simple elegance of its design, a black granite wall inscribed with the names of the fallen, offered a powerful and moving tribute to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Section 2. The Lessons of Vietnam, Shaping Foreign Policy and a Nation's Conscience. The Vietnam War profoundly impacted American foreign policy, ushering in caution and restraint. The discredited domino theory had justified intervention in Southeast Asia. The war showed the limits of American military power and the complexities of foreign conflicts. It left a mark on the American conscience, highlighting the moral ambiguities of war. The anti-war movement raised awareness of the war's human costs. The lessons of Vietnam shaped today's debates on military force and diplomacy. The war catalyzed social and political change in the United States. It fueled the civil rights movement as African Americans demanded equal rights. It empowered activists to challenge the status quo for a just society. The Vietnam War was a searing experience for both nations. Born of Cold War tensions and colonial legacies, it had far-reaching consequences. Amidst the tragedy, there were stories of courage and resilience. The Vietnam War serves as a reminder to learn from the past and strive for a peaceful world.